so there was a jet lag, and people would see me and say, well, aren't you delighted to be here? And it was, and I couldn't say that I wasn't delighted. And I didn't want to say that I wasn't delighted, because I knew the moment I would say, no, I'm not delighted, people would think that I'm not grateful. So that created some kind of a complex situation to be in. But the problem was that, obviously, it took years, but I was eventually delighted. But I think part of what people who were addressing me at the time was expecting a reaction that I wasn't ready to have, because I was jet lagged emotionally and intellectually. And the other thing that you mentioned is this strange sense of anonymity, because, again, I'm sure fellow immigrants in this crowd can attest to this, that, from the moment you arrive in the United States, it truly doesn't matter how much you've accomplished or what you've accomplished. You suddenly, it's like a car, sometimes I've used this metaphor, that has to somehow be reset in its odometer at 0, even though it's a used car. So I felt like at some point, here I am, a person with an entire history and memories and relatives and background, but here I am, not really able to be recognized for that past, and somehow need to reset and begin at 0 again. And I know many immigrants have that experience, which is somewhat about to the experience of being ushered into a sense of anonymity and starting from a place where nobody recognizes you. It can be liberating not to be recognized because you want to blend in, but at the same time, it's also, it can hurt your feelings because you want to be recognized for who you are and what you've accomplished. So all of that is sort of a soup in which we as immigrants kind of swim in when we first arrive. You mentioned that I wrote the book that is not a partisan book. And the reason was I began thinking about this in 2016 when everything was about partisanship. And I felt that I didn't want to be part of the left or the right. I didn't want to be yet another angry voice in a very angry landscape. And therefore, I tried to do the one thing that I knew I could do, which was to make the immigrant knowable, accessible. Because the immigrant was being painted as dangerous, as criminal, as somebody to be worried about, as somebody to not want in our communities. And I thought, rather than take the debate on, all I have to do is to make this immigrant who is being painted in such a way somebody that readers can get under the skin of and get to know, and that's really the effort of the book.
Yeah, and you do it, beautifully. You come to a lot of our events. This book was a lot more enjoyable, a lot more lighthearted and entertaining than some of the books we cover on geopolitics and whatnot. So thank you for that. You noticed your metaphor of a car. Another, I think, wonderful metaphor you have in here is the metaphor of the marriage. You talk about assimilation. Obviously, there's no defining point when you might feel assimilated to the United States or when someone else might consider you to be so. But you compare it to a marriage in that you come to love the United States. You could come to understand its good parts, its bad parts, and its flaws. But you come to love it deeply. And really it is, the challenge, the good parts and the bad parts of marriage, but hopefully good. Could you talk about maybe your own ideas of assimilation, or maybe for yourself, what's an example of when you felt like you reached that point?
I think part of what I at some point recognized, and it wasn't quickly, it took a little while, but I realized that, there were days that I had experiences, whether it was a conversation with somebody, in particular in my first year of college in the United States, I had a university professor who had followed Iranian history and Iranian revolutionary history, and he took me on as a research assistant, which was very odd because in my first year of college I had yet to declare a major, so I could not possibly be useful to anybody as a research assistant. But I think he understood what I had been through just by virtue of having observed Iran, and so he took me on, and I would and I really didn't do any research. What we did was he cared enough to know that the adjustment must be very difficult for me, and simply talked to me and asked me, what had happened, what I had observed, what I had seen in Iran, what I was hoping, what I was reading. It was really, maybe it was therapy, I don't know. But being in his office felt like an arrival of sorts, because arrival isn't just landing here. Arrival isn't just crossing the border. Arrival is about becoming comfortable. Arrival is about feeling that you have come home, or you may be close to coming home. And therefore, I think assimilation, and in the sense that I'm speaking about the notion of arrival, unfolds through multiple stages. And whether it's through relationships that one establishes, or job opportunities that you seek, where you find the pleasure of doing what you love, or mastering the language, which for me was incredibly important. It unfolded in stages. And so I thought it was important to talk about this as an unfolding process, so that people who thought, a neighbor who doesn't speak English immediately, or is still thinking about the old country, isn't necessarily not going to be a good American, because there are ways in which we ourselves as immigrants are trying to figure things out, both emotionally, intellectually, and in every other way. And through this long process, we come to recognize feelings that we don't even know we have. An example that I speak about, I think, in the book, I've written about it as an essay, is that, my father used to, who passed away a few years ago, wrote poetry in Persian, and he had this way of sitting on the balcony of their apartment, which was in Queens, New York, where he had a view of the World Trade Center. So he had a way of, making a particular time every afternoon where he took his pen and notebook, went to the balcony. He had geraniums that he took care of, he watered, and then he put his chair in such a way that he had a view of the World Trade Towers, and then sat there. And you would think that my father, who is sitting in Queens, New York, looking at the World Trade Center, would be composing poems about New York. No, my father was composing poems about Iran and how much he wanted to be back there. And I used to watch this and say, this is totally crazy, he ran away from Iran, he obviously couldn't stay, and now he's here and he's still writing poems about this other country. And then came 9/11, and that morning I happened to be there at my parents' apartment.